Hey, what's up guys, Alex here. Thank you for checking this video and welcome to the 15th part of the series of tutorial WordPress 101 for beginner developers. Welcome again. In this lesson, we're gonna finally complete the topic that we started the lesson before, the lesson 14, the Walker nav class. Just as a quick recap, what we did, we analyzed how the Walker interacts, the Walker class of WordPress interacts with the generation of the HTML of our WP nav menu and how we can edit the first level of this generation. So the UL element that is generated as a starter level when you have a submenu. So when you start having a drop-down or a submenu, when you indent a specific element in your administration panel to edit your menu, you can easily change and modify the output, the HTML generation of that specific level with the function start level from the Walker nav menu. What we have to do right now is keep going and start using the other function that we wrote before, but we just commented because we don't want to interfere with our current menu. The function is the start element or start_el. This function is the function that manage and handle the generation of the HTML markup of a link, a li, and a span. So li, a, and span. And also, like the start level, also the start element has some pre-made variables inside this function that we can pre-populate and we can use to access the predefined attributes that the Walker nav class generates for us. So as we did for the starter level, the first variable that we have to insert is the $output, and is exactly the same as the start level. So this $output maintain all the information of our HTML, of our generated markup. The second variable in this case is the item variable. The item variable contains all the different items, the different elements that are inside our single element. So in this case, our single element is the link of this specific child. So in this case, it's going to be the a tag, and inside this variable are included all the attributes of the specific a tag. So the href, the title, the rel, the target element, all the attributes, the standard HTML attributes that we can find. The third parameter, like it was in the start level, is the depth parameter. So we can write the variable $depth. And in this case, because sometimes we don't have a predefined depth level, most of the time our element is just a single li element or a single a element, doesn't have a depth value. So it's better to specify a pre-made value, a predefined value, just to avoid a completely empty value and trigger some error in our PHP script. So let's put a depth equals 0. This equals 0 is not going to affect the actual value of the depth if the depth has a value. If the depth is empty or is undefined, it's going to have a 0 as a value. So it's not going to be completely undefined, and it's going to help us preventing some weird PHP errors. The fourth variable is the arguments variable. The arguments variable, or $args, it's an array that contains all the information of our item. So what's before our item, what's after our item, and if this item has children or other information. So these arguments, this array of arguments is really important, but also here sometimes could happen that our item doesn't have an arguments array within itself. So we have to specify a predefined empty array just to avoid, again, triggers error. The last parameter is the ID of our element that by default also here we're going to put as a 0 if this element, as usual, as well as the arguments and the depth, doesn't have a predefined ID. So if this element doesn't have a predefined ID, we're going to have a 0 value and not empty or undefined variable or arguments array, whatever. So now we can start coding our start level. And be careful, this is a kind of a complicated section. It's going to be like a bit convoluted. I will try to explain step by step what I'm doing, but it's not going to be easy. Probably sometimes you're going to get lost, and it's normal. Please, if you get lost, go back and start again this tutorial and try again to follow step by step, because whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to follow all the exact steps from the Walker Codex page of WordPress. So the code that I'm writing is going to absolutely work. You have to be, you can be sure about it. If your code doesn't work, probably you made some typos or you missed something. So be sure to follow step by step this tutorial and don't rush. Like, don't be impatient. Just keep calm, try to understand, and you will notice that everything will be wonderful and beautiful. So to start, the first parameter, like we did for our start level, we have to create just a little bit of markup to properly indent the generation of our HTML. So what we want to do is to copy this first line and create another variable called indent, put /t for every depth level that we have. In our case, though, as I said before, sometimes our element doesn't have a depth level, so we cannot, by default, check the amount of repetition, the amount of number that comes inside this depth level, because sometimes this depth variable can be undefined or could be 0. So as a safety precaution, we have to check if we actually have a specific amount, that is, the variable is defined or is different from 0 before starting the string repeat command. And to do that, we can write just the simple if syntax that we already know. So if depth is defined, exclamation mark, we can do the string repeat for as many times as the depth is through. Otherwise, we're going to have an empty variable. So our indent is going to be empty. Now, before starting, we have to define a bunch of empty variables with some specific empty values to populate with our custom HTML markup. So we have to create two variables. The first one is the Lee attributes, that is going to be, as I said, an empty variable, and the second is going to be a class names that is equal our variable value, that it's also equal to empty. So we're going to use this variable inside our loop to populate with our custom HTML markup. And starting with empty variable predefined before the loop is really helpful, so be sure to follow this step. Now we can start retrieving some information from our actual item. So what we want to do, we want to check the classes of our item, and we want to start splitting the class in a specific array so we can loop through that array. So let's define our variable called classes, and our variable has to be equal the item classes array. Also here, the item classes array could be empty. So if we specify these classes with the item classes array and this array is not defined, is undefined, this classes variable is going to be undefined. We don't want that. If the array is not defined, classes should have an empty array. So to check this, we have to check if the array that I want to include is empty. So let's put empty. This empty is a standard PHP Boolean function that returns true if the element inside the parentheses is actually empty. So the array doesn't have any declaration. Item access the sublevel classes. So I'm saying if item classes, that is the array I'm looking for, is empty, question mark, let's return an empty array instead of undefined. Otherwise, oops, no, column, not semicolon. Otherwise, return the array with the item classes included inside. Simple, right? Yes, that should be simple. So we define a variable called classes that is including the classes contained inside the item of our starting element. These classes are, most of the time, they come from the custom classes that we specify inside our administration panel in the menu section. But if this item classes is completely empty, we're gonna create these classes variable with an empty array. So we won't have an undefined variable again. Now we can start adding some specific classes to this array, this variable that it's an array inside. To add something to an array without attaching the string or without overriding the array, we have to use this format. So classes, brackets, square brackets. The square brackets inside a variable that it's an array inside, that has an array inside, specify another level of array. So they merge the predefined array inside this variable with another array. Instead of, like we did here, using the output dot to merge string, we use the square brackets to merge array and not override what's inside the classes. Also here, another if to check if our arguments, the variable that we specified before, if our args that has children, this has children is something, is an attribute inside our args array that is predefined by WordPress. If this value is this args as children is true, it means that the item here has some children. So there's another UL inside the li, and it means that we have to add a specific class. In our case, the class is the dropdown. So let's check with question mark. And if this is true, we're gonna add the class dropdown. We use this dropdown class because it's the default of Bootstrap. So we wanna apply the Bootstrap opening and closing dropdown, but you can name this class however you want. It depends on the framework that you're using, or if you're using your custom CSS, you can replace this dropdown class as you wish. Let's keep going and let's reuse again the dollar classes with the square brackets, so we won't override our array inside. And we have to check again every time before adding a specific value to these classes. It's better check as a safety precaution if we have something. Otherwise, we're gonna add classes one after another without checking if we're adding the class in the proper position. So we have to check another section. If we go in our front end and we click somewhere, probably, yeah, we have an error trigger, so I can do it because we wrote the start element halfway through, so it's not working. I cannot change pages. But if you remember, if you know, Bootstrap by default, if you access a specific page, applies a specific class to the current button of the page. So if I'm in a blog page, this blog link is gonna have a current or an active class applied to it to show the user that you are in this actual page. To do that, we have to use this code. So we have to check if this item is actually current or some sub menu inside this item, some sublink inside this item is the actual current. So you are in this page or in a page that is a children of this is a child of this item. To do that, as usual, let's use the array item that we grabbed from the start, and we check inside if this item is current. So has the class current, in this case has the class has children, in this case has the class current, or we can specify another value here to check if the item has the class current underscore item underscore ancestor. This class, the current item ancestor, is applied automatically by WordPress to this specific item if a link in the submenu of that item is clicked. So you're in a subpage of that parent element. And if this is true, we're going to return a class of active. Otherwise, if this is false, we're going to return an empty variable. Keep going. Let's add the class that by default comes with WordPress, that is the menu item connected to the ID. So let's add menu item dash space dot to connect the string item, and let's access the ID element inside the item array. Now another check. So we could keep going this and just like merging this array that we created, and we could start printing the output of the li and the output of the attributes, but could happen that we have multiple submenu and multiple drop-down submenu inside our item. So to make this menu and this Walker nav class as adaptable and scalable as possible, we have to check all the possible outcome, all the possible editing that a user in the admin panel could apply. So if that happens, we have to check it, and we have to provide a specific class in our classes array to prevent any sort of error or wrong visualization in our HTML. So let's check if we have a depth. In our case, if the li element is not in the first position, but is a sub element of another sub element, and double ampersand to specify that the first statement and the second statement have to be both true, and the args of this depth has also children, we can add another class to our classes array, and the class is drop down dash submenu. Also, this class is a native class of Bootstrap, so also in this case you can name this part however you want if you're not using Bootstrap. Now we can merge all these arrays that we created together, or this information that we generated by checking if our item has some specific arguments or some specific classes. So we can use the variable that we created before, the class names. Let's call the class names, and the class name is equal. We don't have to merge this because we know that the class names starts as a completely empty value. It's equal join. Join is a PHP predefined function to merge some specific arrays, and we have to join. We start with an empty space, so every time we join a class, we add a class from the array. The class is going to be separated by a space, and they're not going to be completely attached. And before joining all the classes that we have in our classes array, we have to apply a filter that WordPress needs, and the filter is the nav menu CSS class. This filter, called with apply filter nav underscore menu underscore css underscore class will edit and will adapt all the classes that we specified here in the proper way that WordPress needs to handle those classes and apply those classes to the specific element. If we don't do that, if you don't apply a filter, WordPress cannot handle the classes that we custom wrote, and it's gonna crash. It's gonna create a lot of weird errors, so we don't want that. So we apply this filter, the nav menu CSS class, to this array that we created, but this apply filter has to be applied to every single class that we specified. So we cannot manually apply filter to this and this and this and this and blah blah blah. Well, we can use another PHP function called array filter. The array filter function loops through all the variables, all the elements that are inside this specific array that we specified, and applies this filter, the first value, to all the single elements, so we don't have to worry about it. The other argument that we want to specify to apply the filter nav menu CSS classes is the item value, because the classes belong to the item and the item has its own arguments. So we have to specify also the arguments. And then we can close with a semicolon. So this is a bit complicated, I can understand, but you have to just to remember, after you checked all the variable classes, indentation, children, depth, and whatever you want to check, and you create your custom classes to inside this array that we created, you have to join this array inside this variable by applying a filter nav menu CSS class that has the ability to unify properly all the classes that you specify. So you have to insert the classes with an array filter, the item that we use for the specific item, and the arguments that we use for that specific item too. All together is going to be joined with a separation, with a space into a single class. So we can use this class to output all our information in the actual output. So let's keep going, and now what we have to do is actually print those classes with a standard writing, with standard HTML. This join doesn't return proper formatting inside this variable. So if we print this class names variable, it's not gonna be readable and it's not gonna be readable for WordPress to include in our specific class. So what we can do, we can escape the attribute through another WordPress pre-made hook and include it in a pre-made class HTML container. So to avoid to specify another variable, we can reuse this one overriding. So let's copy paste the same class, and let's say that this class names is equal to, let's create a space, class equal, open double quote, and inside open single quote to break the string writing, and let's connect the values with 2 dots. And inside we're gonna escape the attributes of our actual class names, and we can close this variable. So now that we defined the class names, we can jump to the next part, that is the definition of the ID that WordPress needs to handle single elements. So our ID variable that by default is set to 0 if you didn't have anything, we can apply another filter to extrapolate the ID from the item ID that we are going through right now. So this filter is called nav underscore menu underscore item underscore ID. The second element to apply this filter is the actual item ID with the string that I want to apply. So in my case, I want the menu dash item dash to be the string, and then I want the number of the ID of this item. That could be like 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, whatever, but we have to retrieve this number dynamically. So let's connect the string with a dot, and then let's print the actual item ID, and let's merge together, as we did before, the actual item and the actual arguments of the item. And let's close with a semicolon. Now we have to check if we actually have the ID. If this variable is not empty or is not 0 as we defined before, because we didn't have any item specified here, or we didn't have any ID specified here, if this variable is not empty, we can return the ID number, or we can return the ID name inside the string. If we don't do that, we're gonna print in our HTML an empty ID attribute, and it's something that you don't want to do. So let's recall the same variable as we did for the class names. We can specify another variable, or we can reuse the same, it doesn't really matter. And we can check if strulen, I don't know how to pronounce this, but this PHP function detects if the variable, the value that it's inside, has a sort of length. So it's not an empty, or it doesn't return a 0. If this ID is more than 0, so there's some elements inside that creates a proper length of this page, we can include in this class the ID equal double quote, single quote to interrupt the string, dot dot to connect the new strings, and escape again the attribute with the WordPress function and put the $ID. Otherwise, if the length of the $ID is completely empty, just return an empty string. It doesn't really matter. So it's better having an empty value, so not printing anything, than printing ID equal nothing. That could cause some problem, especially if we want to handle our DOM with JavaScript connecting to a specific ID. It's better to avoid it. Now we can finally print our output, and we can, as we did before for the starting level, we can take the output variable that is pre-populated, and we can merge the pre-population of the output that inside here, inside the single element, with our custom string. So we're not going to replace it, but we're going to merge it together. First, let's include the indent. So we're going to have a specific indentation for every time our item is in an actual sub-menu. Then with the dot to merge the string, we can create the actual item. The item is the li. That's what we're creating. So let's write li. And here we can connect all the values that we created. So the ID, the value, the class name, and the li attributes that we specified. That in our case, li attributes is currently empty because we don't have any li attributes, but it doesn't matter. For now, we just keep it empty and don't worry about it. So let's write ID, then connect with dot. Let's put our value. Let's connect with a dot. Let's put our classes. Oops, our class names. Let's put dot li attributes. Let's connect with a dot, and let's close the opening tag of our li element, semicolon. So this li attribute, as you remember, we specified here, and it's completely empty. This value, this variable, gives us the ability to write whatever attributes we want. If, for example, we are using an HTML5 driven DOM manipulation, we could write data attribute equal something, whatever. And this data attribute is going to be applied every time a Lee element is generated. So this is great. And in this case, we can generate all the classes that we want. You can put it inside the Lee generation of our submenu with all the elements classes by checking the properties of our actual item. Where are we in that specific moment? So now we have the output of the Lee. And if you notice, we just did this. We just created the Lee with the actual ID classes. So we now have to generate the A tag, the actual link attribute that it's inside the Lee. And then we have to close our HTML and then publish everything. So let's keep going and let's not waste time in chit-chatting. Now we have to use another variable that has to contain all the attributes of our actual link tag. In this case, because the tag has specific attributes, we're gonna call this class attributes. Easy, right? If we print these arguments without checking if these arguments are not empty, we're gonna trigger a lot of errors. So let's be careful and let's detect every time if a specific attribute is not empty. To do that, we have to put an exclamation mark before the if statement. The exclamation mark, it's for is not. So if it's not empty and we're checking the item attribute title, that what we want to print, if this is not empty, let's generate the string, the HTML attribute title space 2 dots to connect, and let's escape these attribute with the usual item attribute title, the thing that we just checked. Otherwise, let's return an empty value. So what we have to do is we have to repeat this check for all the attributes that we have inside our link. And because we started defining our attributes for our link here, now every time we repeat the attributes value, we have to connect the previous statement with the newest one. So let's use the dot equal to merge the strings. So let's copy this entire line. I don't want to repeat writing everything, but let's put if attribute is merging with the previous one. The second value that I want to check is the target. If the item target is defined, so it's not empty, I'm gonna put target and I want to print the target. Otherwise, empty again. Let's copy these, let's put it here, and again merge. The other value is the rel. So rel could be like author or external or wherever. The rel is passed inside the item as xfn value. I don't know why is the actual technical HTML tag name and WordPress is using this instead of rel. So let's just remember this. This could be confusing, but the xfn contains the rel statement. So if this is not empty, let's print it. Otherwise, empty variable. Attributes again. The other variable that I want to detect, that is the most important variable of a link, is the actual URL. So if this is not empty, I want to print an href and URL. Otherwise, it's empty. So now that we are printing all the elements here in our A tag, in our link, I have to actually add a specific custom class if the link has some children. So if the link is the container of a submenu. And in this case, also, we're going to use a specific class from Bootstrap. So let's paste again the same line, and in this case, we're not going to detect if the item as something, but we're going to detect if the arguments of the container as children, like we did before. So if args has children, we're going to add the class that is the class from Bootstrap. So I'm not creating anything new, but I'm copying the syntax from Bootstrap to open and close the tag. And plus, we're going to use a data attribute called data toggle that it says to toggle the actual dropdown. Otherwise is empty. So now that we built finally also the a tag with all the attributes, and inside the attributes we have everything we need for our link, we can build the actual output of our item and then print everything to our menu. So let's create another variable called item output that is going to contain all the elements that we defined, and then we can push everything inside the output after the lead tag that we just opened. So item output is equal to args before. The before statement of the args is whatever class HTML attribute, HTML markup, WordPress is generating by default. So always remember, when you open and close the finalizing item output, always include item args, always include args before and args after, because these two elements print the actual proper tag that needs to be there to wrap the item that we're generating. So the second parameter that I want to add to my output is the actual link. So let's open the a link and let's connect the strings with all the attributes that we specified inside. And let's close our a tag. Inside here, now that we opened the a tag, we have to put the actual name of our link. And in this case, we have to use the title of our item title. So to do that, let's recopy again this part. And let's include arguments, what's before the link. Also here, important markup, and apply the filter. Oops, if I know how to write, apply. And in this case, we apply another pre-made filter from WordPress that is the title, because we want to print the title in the proper way. And we use the item title from a specific or the actual current item ID. So we're not grabbing a random title from wherever item is happening. And after this, we close our link with the arguments that are inside the link after, and semicolon to close. Now we have to include another element, a class that Bootstrap uses when you have a submenu, that is the little arrow, the caret that is pointing down to specify, oh look here, this link is not an actual link, but it's a sublink with a submenu underneath here. So we have to detect again if our item has some children, but we don't want to apply the caret, the actual little arrow pointing down, to an element that is a submenu, because a submenu doesn't have to have an arrow, but only the first element, the one that is in the main level, so in the parent, the higher parent level. To detect this, we have to check two elements. So again, item output merge with dot equal, and we have to check if our depth level is equal 0. So it means we are on the first level, we are not in a sub menu, and double ampersand, so to specify and these other arguments has to be true, that it means that this item has children. And question mark, and if both these statements are true, we can add our wonderful class element called caret. Also, this is a pre-made markup from WordPress, so I'm specifying this, and we can close here the a link. Otherwise, if we don't have any children in that specific element, we can just simply close the link HTML markup. And finally, we already specify item output with args after, and now we have to merge once again all together with an apply filter with everything we did, everything we created, and all the variables that we generated. So let's call again, finally, for the last time, our output variable dot equal to merge our strings and apply again the filter. And in this case, the filter is just for this specific section that we are working on. Is the Walker underscore nav underscore menu underscore start underscore L. That is the element of the nav menu. And the second parameter is our item output. So is the A tag, the actual link that we created, because we already created the output with the li. So after the li, there's the A. And then we put inside all the information that comes with our item, what's depth we have for our item, and all the arguments of our item. And then we close with a semicolon. We save, we go in our front end, we reload our website, and it's not working because we did a bunch of mistakes. That is totally normal. It's pretty, as you notice, it's a pretty heavy PHP code, and doing mistakes is pretty normal. So let's just check with the output what we did. On line 51, let's try apply filter. Oops, I'm so sorry guys, it's actually apply filters. It's not apply filter. I should type less and use more the predefined code of PHP, the code suggestions. Let refresh, and then we have a bunch of undefined property that has children in our worker. So every time I use has children, it doesn't come any value. Oh, but it's generating my menu. Nice. So this thing doesn't have any children, but I'm checking if he has children. So why is not working? Oh, I'm sorry guys. Yeah, that's a main mistake. So the arguments array, the arguments object has the property has children inside a sub array. So we have to access that has children inside the sub array. To access that, we have to jump just a step. Then inside this subarray Walker. I always forget this. I'm sorry. It's kind of dumb having all the arguments in the first level of the array and then having some specific arguments in a sub level called Walker. It's really weird, especially because in this sub level Walker we have only 4 or 5 arguments that could easily be all together in this main array, but whatever. So every time we have args has children, let's put a Walker to go into a sub level, and let's search this has children all the time we used it, so we won't miss it anything. Walker has children, args has children, Walker, and we're good to go. And let's check again. And that's it. And now it's working. And if you notice, we have two magical things that are happening. They're happening in our beautiful, beautiful menu. First, we have the active class that we specified. So because this is the current page, we are in the actual current page. We have our current class applied to our item. We have our active class applied to our item. The active class is the class of Bootstrap. So we manually implemented these classes, and we have the submenu that it's working. If we click on the submenu, we have the little triangle, the little arrow that is specifying that. Underneath here, we have a submenu. And if we click, it opens the submenu with the page that we specified inside. So now we have a fully functional navigation bar that works with the Bootstrap CSS frameworks. So just to recap, we checked how the Walker Nav menu class works and how we can easily modify the UL container of our WP nav menu and the li and a tag of the WP nav menu as well, and how we can insert custom classes, custom element, and custom HTML markup on every section of our menu generated content. So I'm sorry if this lesson is quite complicated and it's really long. I think I reached almost more than 30 minutes, and I know it's complicated, but let's try to go back and redo it from scratch and try to follow step by step every argument we touched and try to experiment with this class. Try to experiment if you want to edit the end element and the end level that I didn't touch, because by default I just want the li element to be closed automatically and the UL element to be closed automatically. I don't want to touch that, but if you want, you can try with the same variables, arrays, and attributes. Try to style those closing elements. So experiment with the Walker Nav class. Is a really huge class, is a really huge core functionality of WordPress that can give you a lot of power. So from great power comes great responsibilities, and be careful to not commit mistakes as I did, but it's gonna happen. It's a complicated class, so it's gonna happen some typos or something's missing. So no worries, just be patient, try to analyze your code and try to understand what you did wrong. So thank you again for checking this video. I hope you enjoy it. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up or subscribe to my channel and share it. If you want to increase the visibility of these tutorials, if you think that some of your friends could be interested, please share this video. So thank you again, guys, and talk to you soon with another video. See ya.